I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Karen Glanz, who's a George A. Weiss University professor in the School of Medicine and Nursing at Penn. She is co-leads the cancer control program at the Aberson Cancer Center, and where she was also the associate director for community engaged research, the topic that we're going to talk about today. And her research in the community and healthcare settings focus on obesity nutrition and the built environment, reducing health disparities, and health communication technologies. Dr. Glantz is established in the field, over 540 articles and chapters, and the editor on 5 editions of a widely used text, the Health Behavior Theory, Research, and Practice. So we're really excited to have Dr. Glantz today, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Sarah. I'm going to give a very brief introduction about community engaged research and a little bit of my background and some general principles. For some people, this will be very familiar. For others, it may be new. And then we'll move into the chat part. So if we were in a live audience, I would ask people to raise their hands if they know who that gentleman is in the picture on the first slide. Maybe people can virtually raise their hands. How many people know who that is? I don't know how I'm going to be able to see the answers. Just put a thumbs up, I guess. I'm getting some thumbs ups. Probably other people are going like, "What? Who is this? Never saw that person." Well, the answer is that is Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was president of the United States, and he originated the idea of the Fireside Chats 92 years ago in 1933 during the Depression, when certainly technology was very different than it is now, but he was looking for a way to reach people, to have a more or less conversation, even though it was him speaking, because there wasn't interactive technology. And so he began the Fireside Chats then. And so with PISCE's approach to the Fireside Chat, other than my opening remarks, we'd love to have this be a bit interactive. The group's going to be kind of large, so we'll start with the Q&As, and then we'll be able to have people speak live as well, time permitting. Next slide. So I've been involved in a lot of community engaged research across the year. Before I came to Penn, I was a professor at Temple University, then University of Hawaii, then Emory University. So I've been in different communities. These are examples of some of my projects of community engaged research. They involve working with communities in Philadelphia and in other locations. I've worked with people in different age groups, and particularly did a lot of work when I was in Hawaii with youth, and including on some sensitive subjects like whether kids could buy.
Asked us to start with.
Oops. Okay. Somebody wasn't muted. Whether kids could buy alcohol when they were underage. So a lot of that over time. We also worked with kind of youth empowerment and trying to encourage youth to take their own stand as part of our community engaged research. Next slide. So these are some of my projects now and in the past. I'm involved with the Amethyst at Penn. I saw Rebecca Ham as in the group today, who co-leads out with Megan Lane Fall, a maternal equity implementation science resource center for centers around the country. the Cancer Prevention Control Research Network, a network of 8 different university centers, and some of my own studies, some of them at single sites, and some of them multi-site, like the Pool project, which was at 400 sites around the country and beyond. Next slide. So my current organizations are the Center for Health Behavior Research that I lead, the UPenn Prevention Research Center, which I co-lead with Dr. Lola Fayanju, and the Community Engagement and Research Core of the CTSA. And be talking a little bit about that if people are interested in what that means to have a core there. Together with colleagues at Jefferson and Fox Chase Cancer Center, we worked on an engagement grant called PC3, Philadelphia Communities Conquering Cancer. And the picture at the bottom of this slide is a group that we trained to work on research about a year ago, and still working with that group that we trained. And then before that, I have a long history of conducting community engaged research in Pennsylvania, Georgia, Hawaii, Michigan, across the US and beyond. Next slide. So what are we talking about when we say community engaged research? And this includes patient engaged research, but just using the word community to encompass all of it. It involves community partners working with researchers to identify research priorities, design studies, recruit, collect data, deliver interventions, analyze data, and share findings. Why engage communities? It helps make sure the research addresses issues that are important to the community, improves the chances that more people will know what studies are being conducted and learn the results of the research, and it can increase the chances that people who participate in research can benefit from the research. And I think importantly, and this, I think those of you that have been involved in community engaged research will recognize that it can enrich the lives of both researchers and community members. So it provides another level of learning for all of us. Next slide. So the working definition of community engaged research from a book that's often considered kind of the definitive resource, Principles of Community Engagement, just came out in its 3rd edition. It's a large collaborative volume. It defines community engagement as working collaboratively with and through groups of people affiliated by geography, interest, or other situations to address issues affecting their well-being. And the general goals include building trust, involving community, creating mutually beneficial relationships, and improving overall health outcomes for relevant communities. Next slide. So what kind of questions can be answered with community engaged research? This is not just about doing interventions. Community engaged research can be useful for descriptive studies or epidemiological studies to understand the community. It can help us create practice-based evidence. Does a community-based and created program work? Sometimes, labeled evaluation, but can be beyond evaluation. And creating evidence-based practice. Does a program or intervention work within that community setting, something that might have been developed elsewhere? Next slide.
Hi.
So there's, please mute. There's a lot of reading and a lot of information out there, and I wanted to just give you the very shorthand 10 top principles of community engagement. 1, be clear about the purpose of the work and the communities. Become knowledgeable about the community. Build relationships and trust with individuals and leaders. Remember that collective self-determination is a responsibility and the right of all people in a community. Partner with the community to create change and improve health. Next slide. Recognize and respect diversity, identify and mobilize community assets and strengths, recognize the importance of flexibility to meet changing needs, strengthen long-term commitment and collaboration, and trustworthiness is fundamental to sustaining successful community engagement. These are a lot of principles. There are a lot of different people who can describe and tell you about community engagement and tell you that there are a lot of so-called musts. You must do this, you must do that, you must have a long-term relationship. There is really a ton of diversity within community engaged research. And I think the principles at the root of it are what keeps a bit of glue together. So next slide. So there are challenges involved with community engaged research. From the academic perspective, sounds good to engage the community, but there may be a mismatch between academic and community interests and expectations. We may have goals of more publications, more grants, doing something, discovering something new. That may not be where the community is coming from. The time investment. I've heard more times than I can count academics who begin to do and dive into community engaged research say this takes too much time and this doesn't move fast enough. It isn't traditionally prioritized by academia. Penn and CHOP and other institutions have recently begun to incorporate engagement writ large into their criteria for promotion, tenure of reappointment, and so on. But there's a lot of mushiness in how that's defined and how it's counted. And expectations for disseminations of results. Community members often want to hear about results right away. They don't want to wait for a journal article to appear, and that can create some friction in terms of making sure that we, quote, get it right scientifically. Next slide. So there are also barriers from the community perspective. There is a history of many researchers of leaving community concerns and interests out of the research agenda. And so some community members may be cautious, standoffish, maybe not even interested in participating. The research component of what we're doing is often an added responsibility to what community members and health organizations and public health and social service organizations may see as their role and their job. And the distinctions between research, advocacy, and administrative change can lead to unrealistic expectations. And these are just the top few. But among other things, we may write a grant application to fund a community engaged study, and we might not get funded, and the community may have already invested in it. And that makes for challenges. There may be rules of funders that are unfamiliar to community members and don't sit right with them, but that we as researchers are required to ensure are followed. Next slide. So this is just a very tip of the iceberg introduction from my side. And one thing that's really important with community engaged research is acknowledgement. So I have only one bullet point to acknowledge the many colleagues and staff who co-learn and help make our community engaged research a reality, and also make it fun and rewarding, and get us through the challenges as well. So too many to name, but also I want to acknowledge my current funding sources related to community engaged research, the Community Engagement and Research Core of the CTSA, and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention for our UPenn Prevention Research Center. And with that, I think we can start to take questions.
Okay. Well, thanks, Karen. I'm glad we have a lot of time for questions. Um, you can continue to put questions in the chat because I'll be monitoring it. But I'm going to start with a few that folks sent in. We'll start with the friction that you talked about. And one of the questions was, what remains the biggest barrier, in your opinion, to community participation in research?
Um, well, that's a very general question. So,
Yeah,
so,
and yeah, and they did go on, so I can
yeah,
continue a little bit. So thinking about the biggest barrier, but also, thinking about insufficient community engagement, partnership, touching on the mistrust in research, and then importantly, how you've addressed some of these challenges.
sure. Um, I think there are a couple of things. I think one of the biggest challenges for community participation in research is that the type of participants we're looking for and the things that we're asking for them may not resonate. They may feel burdensome, they may feel foreign, they may not feel beneficial to people in the community. And oftentimes, if we are, depending on how we approach them, we may be strangers. Um, and In addition to that, something that we've really noticed a lot more often recently is that often academic researchers can be confused with marketing researchers. And that's a really tough nut to crack because the rules that we abide by, things like human subjects protection and all those principles, are not necessarily being followed by market researchers who are also calling up and asking somebody to answer a survey or to do something. Um, how can we overcome them? Well, uh, first of all, early engagement helps a lot, but early engagement can mean different things. It can mean after a grant has some funding, or it can mean before you even write a proposal. And within that, there is this balancing act between meeting scientific expectations, let's say, to get the funding and the way that we describe what we plan to do, and what the community understands, experiences, thinks will be of interest to people. So there's a lot of balancing act there. But let's say we already have funding and we just want to recruit people to participate in a study that's going to involve them completing some measurements and maybe being randomized. That becomes another kind of hurdle for many people. Um, it has to do with explaining things in plain language, but also explaining things in a way that is inviting, interesting, and where community members can see a benefit. Now, that said, not all research provides immediate benefit. So, again, it's kind of a balancing act between them. So, a couple of different ways to think about that.
Okay, and have you address these challenges? And specifically, are there certain strategies that you've used to build trust? So really honing in on that trust between you and your community partner or the research team and the community partner. Um, and yeah, I'll stop there. And then
Yeah. So
within
that
that,
so I'll
it's
take
just,
those two parts of the
yeah.
question. How do you handle that?
Uh-huh.
Um, Thinking to really recent and ongoing research. Um, First of all, not all the input that we get from community members is is in agreement with internally. So we may pull together a group to give us input. We often use a strategy that many of you have probably heard of called community engagement studios or community discussions. And we may find that, half the people feel this is amazing and wonderful, and other people feel like it has to be completely redone. So the first thing is in interpreting and trying to make sense of the input we get. The second thing is determining what's changeable and what isn't changeable. Because if we've been funded to do a study, then we have an obligation also to stay true to the purpose that we were funded to accomplish. And yet there is a lot of wiggle room in what we can adapt and change and make more, let's say, community friendly, community agreeable. So it's making those decisions, and also communicating back to the community, whether it's through leaders or a community advisory board or directly to participants, what our decisions were, including maybe we took your advice on A, but on B, we were unable to do that because it would have a completely different purpose than what our study was about, let's say. As far as building trust, yeah, well, we probably don't have enough time to talk about all the many things that go into building trust, but building trust is a central component of building relationships. And uh, building relationships has to do with the attitude that we go in with and the commitments that we make at every step of the way. And it's again is often a balancing act because there may be other people who came before us who were not trustworthy, and that memory may carry over, whether it's something big like the Tuskegee syphilis experiments or something like another colleague at Penn who came in and did not treat the community well and was not interested in getting the community's opinion and was, kind of arrogant. And, that kind of carries over because people think, okay, we're working with researchers. I think being caring about your communities is really important. I know that's easier said than done. Getting to know them, listening to them. I think listening more than talking, not just informal data collection type of experiences, but in meetings is really important. And sometimes that takes drawing people out because there's also sometimes an intimidation factor, not for people that distrust academics, but that may feel like they know so much and I don't know that much. So I think trust is really part of building relationships. And the word gets out, uh, especially if you're working within a community, even if you're working with different types of groups in the community. One of the best things that we ever had a community member say, and one of my experiences, this is when I was at Emory, and we were working with a group in rural Southwest Georgia, and we had an advisory group that we worked with before we went out to engage individuals. And this doc, he's a family medicine doc, in introducing us to other people, said, these aren't pointy-headed academics. And he said, these are people that really care about making things better for us. So I think part of building trust is building trust with one person leading on to the next.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm gonna just stay on challenges for one more minute because we got something coming in the chat, talking specifically about when grants aren't funded. So in your experience, do you have any recommendations or have you used specific strategies when a grant isn't funded and you've already partnered and embedded yourself in the community?
No, all my grants get funded. Just kidding. They do not. Nobody gets all their grants funded, not even among the best of us. I think it begins with being honest from the start that when we're putting a grant application in, we're not, guaranteed that it's going to be funded. I think the next thing is kind of tiptoeing a little bit, being a little careful in terms of how much we ask from our community partners up front. We all know how much work it is to write a competitive grant application. And we know that we're not always going to get funded. But if we're engaging them and it was something they weren't going to do until we approached them, we're really asking them for extra work. So I think it's important to think about what can we give them in the process before we have an outcome. And then if we have an outcome, if this is something that is really important to them, important to us, what are the potential next steps? Is it resubmitting? Is it submitting somewhere else, looking for other funding sources? Or is it moving on to some other topic with that group or otherwise? So there's no easy answer to that, but it happens a lot.
Yeah. 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 Those are all solid responses. And I wanted to just move to a question that's timely with your sunshine in the background, but I know you spent some time in Hawaii. And can you talk a little bit about how that influenced your career, if at all?
Sure. Well, it definitely influenced my career. I spent 11 years at the University of Hawaii, um, at the Cancer Research Center and School of Public Health, and working with people across campus. Um, and in the Cancer Research Center, which was my academic departmental home, um, I was not the first, but among the first interested in working in the community. And this is really, it'll feel like ancient history. I went there in 1993. And I remember we didn't all have websites at the time, and telling my center director we needed to have a website. And even though our center didn't have the capacity to do that, there were people over in computer sciences, literally, that could do a web. And everybody was like, why do you need a website? And we were working with schools all around the state. And they, I came back, years later after I was no longer working there. And I had epidemiology colleagues who were doing a large multi-ethnic cohort study with hundreds of thousands of people. And it was in Hawaii and also in California. And they said to me, "Oh, now we understand why you needed a website." So for one thing, we were navigating in less technologically advanced times. Number one. Number two, I moved to Hawaii without really having had much experience there, and it was the first time that I was, as a white person, in the minority racially. So that's a bit of a culture shock. It's different, but then you learn very quickly that you meet people where they are, that people are, you know, people everywhere. They want to be cared about, they want to be understood, listened to, and yet there are also some that will treat you as an outsider. And one of the first grants I wrote that was a call for proposals for Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders from the NIH. Went out and got a couple Native Hawaiian groups to collaborate with us with the proposal. We did not get funded. We were trying to look at next steps. I went out with one of my research coordinators, and he was Portuguese West African, Black. And we went out to these centers and we got a lot of pushback and no interest in further collaboration. And having him with me really helped me process. He said, "There's nothing you can do to make them happy." Basically, he said, they felt that they were burned by somehow collaborating and not. Now, it's not really true that there's nothing in the long run that you could do to make them happy, but there was nothing true at that time. And part of it was the legacy of other colleagues who had conducted research in ways that were insensitive to the community. But don't want to take up the whole hour to talk about it. But I will say that on the upside, being in a multicultural environment was interesting and enriching because I also resonate to the environment. I'm an outdoor person. I like the water. I like the land, and many of those cultural values, and the value of nobody being a stranger. People who know a bit about Hawaii, we talk about Ohana. Um, and it's not just people who are your blood relatives, it's people who are feel like family. And
Mm.
so on the positive side, I really had some wonderful experiences career-wise, particularly when we worked with people in more rural areas like an island of Molokai, um, and just uh, seeing how they lived. We also did build something in. I showed in the first one of the first slides that we work with youth a lot, and in working with youth, we always try to build in a component of our research project that was personal and educational and career development. And it was extremely rewarding to take some of our youth to the mainland for the first time, but also to help them with applications to college, and with getting into internships that would expand their opportunities. And so that was a really good component. The other, just a little story, is that we spend a lot of time in human subjects protection dealing with the issue of confidentiality, and that we will protect the identity of people who participate in our studies. So I had a handful of studies where we were sending out letters, sending out surveys, and they're all signed by me as PI. And we're saying to them, we're not going to tell anybody who you are. And then it's a very small community. So I would go out and someone says, "Oh, I got a letter. I'm in one of your studies." And you realize this is not as black and white as you think it is. You're not going to say, "Oh, I don't know that you're in my study." You want them to feel that you appreciate them being in the study as well. So, just a few sidelines from that period of my life that did carry over.
Great, really, that's really interesting. Um, and then we received a few questions just from training and recommendation strategies for early career researchers. So, um, tips for pre-doc, postdoc fellows that might not have been that haven't been doing this as long as you have, and specifically starting with like navigating the temporality of, being in a academic institution, maybe while you're in training only for a couple years. And so how do you navigate that, building partnerships, knowing you might only be at the institution for a few years?
Sure. Well, I would say first, it's really important to connect with people who have experience in what it is you want to become more expert at. And I realize that that may not be your primary mentor. Um, and there are a lot more, available resources, written resources, books and toolkits and all those things than there were years ago in this space. But I do think there is nothing like experience. Penn is jam-packed with experience. I mean, like Sarah, for instance, and her colleagues. I mean, there are so many. I came to Penn in 2009, and we started running the Community Engagement Corps in 2013. And since then, there's just been a explosion or blossoming, depending on how you want to think of it, of community engaged research in different areas, and cross cutting. I mean, the work again that Sarah and Nikki Thomas and their team do cuts across a lot of different areas. And then there's Cancer Center and CFAR, and I can't name all of them. But I think that as a student or a junior faculty, connecting up and becoming a learner, not just saying, okay, I'm going to be the expert, even though um, mentor is a clinician who has never done any of this kind of work. I'm going to be the expert in the group. Try and, learn from others as well, recognizing that when you learn from others, you will see things that um, that you really like, that you want to pick up on, and you'll see things that you question. And that's part of becoming a growing professional. It's not just to take and copy from what you learn.
Okay, thanks, Karen. All right, this next question is get ready to think about theories and frameworks. Someone wanted to know if you've ever combined patient engagement frameworks with implementation science frameworks to evaluate the engagement in interventions, and if you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, we do that all the time. I feel like I should, ask some of my team who are in the group to give some examples. But basically, yeah, I mean, I think for actually implementation science, and since this is a PISCE sponsored event, um, it couldn't be more important than to get input from people. Theories and models. Um, it's I guess to take a step back, I think what's important is to be familiar with a variety of theories and models so that you are not just trying to fit a round peg into a square hole because that's the theory that your advisor used or that your program is most often using. Um, there's a lot of kind of figuring out what theory, what model works. So, as an example, one of the logos that I showed on my early slide is a study called Step Together that we're now analyzing the results. It's a study, it's an implementation science study trying to implement and compare, it's a hybrid uh, implementation effectiveness study comparing two approaches to what we call social incentives for increasing physical activity and compared with the control group. And when we were starting the study, we conducted community engagement studios. So when you think about the questions that you're asking, we were asking key informants in community organizations, and then we were asking residents, who are the ultimate people that would be the study participants. And framing your questions using that theory or framework that's informing your work. In our case, it was why people do or don't move, basically. And our study also was designed to take place with family teams. So there was very much of a kind of a social support element in there. So our questions for some of the people to inform us, our community partners, was built around those frameworks. And I think that's a really good way to not reinvent the wheel, to have a logical approach that's worked, and as long as it fits with what you're doing. You muted.
Thanks for that. All right. And now you touched upon this a little bit, but someone had asked about your first experience with community-based research and any stories, which you've been telling along the way, but any additional stories that might highlight how labs began to center partnership and community engagement in their roles.
Well, I'll tell you, we didn't call them labs. Um, and it's interesting. I was, my graduate education was in a school of public health, and there was a lab component in the School of Public Health, but it was not the social and behavioral. Um, and I was in kind of health education and health behavior. We were one of the first departments to combine social sciences with health education. Um, so what was the question? I'm getting off track here. Early
About
experience. Early
your
experience.
yeah, one of your
Um,
first.
yeah, I mean, I have to say, um, been around for a while. Um, I was always involved in communities as a kid, to be honest. Now I wasn't doing research, but I was, a member of like service organizations, and then again in college, I went to college at Michigan. It was kind of a small town, Ann Arbor, where as a student, you could become involved. I was in the fruit and vegetable co-op. I, I was in um, at the time, the anti-rape committee. And so being a community member, I think is part of what started me. Post education, my first faculty position was at Temple University. And one of my first responsibilities was to get a new Master of Public Health program up and running. It was the first one in Philadelphia, so this is many years ago, and getting internships for people and working with everything from the public health department to the small nonprofits on board to do that. And they always had to include an evaluation component. So that internship in itself was not a research project the way we might think of a NIH funded study and so forth. But that was one of my earliest experiences. And I would say I was not a person who had lived in Philadelphia. I basically moved here after graduate school. And I think part of it is making connections, reaching out. Um, Part of it's a sales pitch, but part of it is making friends. So it's kind of that blend. I think I guess if you go from being the very younger, early stage person to being a more senior person, I rely a lot on my staff and my team as I've become more senior because I may not have all the time to invest, but I find it's very important to be present and to be not, if you will, above being part of the community. But it's also to hire well and to hire people that, if they haven't had that experience, will kind of naturally grow into it.
Great. Thank you. Then the next question's around those nuances around the funder and a community-based organization meeting the needs of the funder versus meeting the needs of a community-based organization and how you navigate that.
Yeah, that's another very broad question, depending on, kind of what the funder is and what their involvement is with the work. So I've worked with funders who are very involved, um, maybe babysitting at times. And then we work with other funders who give you the money and say, go do the work and report back. And we're trusting you to, follow the proper procedures in your institution to oversee, how you spend the money, how you consent and enroll participants, et cetera. So it's kind of all over the map. I do remember when I was in Hawaii, there was a foundation that funded some of our work with youth tobacco prevention. And I just thought they were entirely too engaged. And, I said something. I mean, again, small community in a way, at least a small public health community. And they said, look, that's the way we are. If we give you money, we're accountable for it. We, we want to hear often what you're doing and be able to give your feedback. So I think sometimes we as, funded entities need to swallow our pride and roll with the punches and, make the best of it and also get to understand what's important to them so that they can increasingly have confidence and trust as funders as well as your community partners.
Great. Thank you. So this next and last question, but we have some in the chat that came in from the audience, is about applying models and frameworks and fitting them in within community settings that allow so that the framework allows for flexibility and if you've ever had to handle that
Yes.
and how you handle that.
Yeah, I mean there's always has to be flexibility. So I mean one of the things about models and frameworks is that they are the frame. They're not everything that fills in its application. So it's somewhat inherent that there's going to be some evolution of what are the details, what are the fine points. Um, there also may be a time when you find out that a model or a framework isn't the right one for what you're doing and that you really need to pivot. And I go back to my answer to an earlier question, which is being familiar with a range of models and frameworks. Now, there are a gajillion models and frameworks, but there is a much more manageable number that are frequently used and that are broad in their potential scope and applicability. And I think that if you or someone on your team comes in with that background knowledge, you will maybe realize that, oh, self-efficacy is really not what we need here. What we need here is, I don't know, cultural sensitivity. I'm
Right.
making it up, but and that's where we need to put our energy and time. So it goes with that bottom line of flexibility, but balanced with rigor if you're doing research.
Mhm. Great. So, again, hitting on that balance. There's a few questions that came in the chat. I'll call on you if you want to ask your own question. Seal.
Hi, I just have a question about the power dynamic. And so the community-driven project cannot succeed without the community's involvement. I highly respect their opinions, but they oftentimes at the end they kind of feel like there's a power imbalances. They often feel like there's a power imbalances. I would love to hear your tips that you use to ensure them do not feel any like that type of like power imbalances.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And often that power imbalance exists. I would say, it exists going back, and some people who are in the audience may remember this, to when the early days of community health centers. And the federal government was giving money to fund community health centers, and they required that there be a community board. And when so everybody followed the rules and they had a community board and then when people started actually taking a look at what happens with these community boards, people found that the lay people from the community were intimidated by the doctors and they came to the table, but most of them didn't really have much to say because of that power differential. I think I think the onus is on us to be conscientious and also to communicate what we see as different parties bringing to the table and bringing to the effort that we're taking on. Um, there will, it will never be possible to overcome completely um, in, if you get right down to it. But as as long as people understand what it is that they bring to the table and that it is a team, if you can create a team, and teams don't, spring full blown from the first meeting that you make. Um, it's also, and this just goes down a different path. It also interacts with personality and style. And that's another dynamic that can kind of interfere sometimes with our attempts to level the playing field. So I think it's also making sure that what we do is bidirectional, that it's give and take. So it's not just us taking from them to accomplish our research and build our portfolio, our career, our institutional standing. So it does take a bit of self-searching and um, kind of learning, co-learning, but it is complicated because I remember um, one time I was at a conference and some people here will know or will at least have read something by Larry Green, Dr. Larry Green, who developed the pre-seed proceed model and is a real luminary in the health promotion, health education area. And we were out walking with a colleague from, happened to be from Oregon. And Larry said, that community engagement group, you were having so much trouble with it. And it was like really full of conflict. How's that going? Has that, improved? Has it changed at all? And the person from Oregon said, yeah, it changed. The problem person left. And, it was kind of like an eye opener that, the problem wasn't an overall community problem. It was and is sometimes a matter of style and interactions. So I hope that gives you some thoughts on that.
Yeah, and if it's all right, I'm going to shed a little bit of light. I totally agree. The onus is on us as researchers, and I always tell people to be very intentional about that because it's so important. I've done things. I pull sometimes from co-design, and I'll like sit on the floor or something like that. Another thing I like to do is to have them be the expert in their space. So attending community events where you're not part of the community and letting them hold that expertise around you. So just wanted to fill in a little bit.
No,
And
those are great, great comments.
and then I think we have time for one more question. I'm going to pitch it to Amy. Um, Amy, are you available to unmute or do you want me to?
I am. Hi, thanks. Thanks, Sarah. Hi, Karen. This is great. I've enjoyed the entire hour with you. And my question is, we are seeing more and more trainees be very interested in training in this space. And you did touch on this a little bit, but I was thinking about, beyond, I agree that having research experiences in this space with larger teams or investigators who have this expertise are just remarkable training experiences for engaged research or partnered research. But are there other specific training things that you have found to be like really helpful to junior faculty or trainees who want to really develop in this space?
I'm not thinking offhand. I can tell you lots of things with theories and models and frameworks, at training institutes and things like that, and measurement and clinical trials, et cetera. Um, I think that one, I think that there are some institutions where there's a very active and well-developed um, program where there may be some training courses. There are a lot of seminars, certainly, and a lot of one-offs. But as far as like doing an internship or something, I mean, again, they exist, but there's not like one central place. I don't know, Sarah, do you know of any
Yeah, I mean, there are some.
for academics?
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
some decent online like training modules for CBPR. I'm putting a link in the chat that's from just a resource library that has some of those resources for academics. But I think the best training is being in the community.
Mhm.
And you'll read about all the principles and you can look at training modules, but until you're really out there, experience and have your own learnings from the groundwork, Yeah, I think I would say that's the best training of all.
Yeah.
So find those
Yeah.
people that might, can give you introductions. And I'm happy to be one of those as well. So I want to close out now. We're at 1:59. Thank you all so much for being with us and for this fireside chat. I think it was just
Yeah, and
a
I do want
normal
to
by the
echo
fire.
the one comment that came into the chat, perhaps join a local community organization. If you do community service, if you are on the parent teacher or, association, if you are part of an organization, not in your role as a researcher, that will also help build your skills in that area.
All right. Thank you, Karen and Dr. Glantz, and on behalf of PISCE, thank you for joining. We hope to see you again.
Thanks, everybody.